I am so glad you convinced me that the family car should be the Defender 110. It is so beautiful inside, it's so comfortable, and it just feels indestructible.
Yes, it really is. I've been waiting a long time for the new model to come out. The Defender 110, I'm telling you, it's my favorite car of all times. It's my third one. You know, I have stories of going off road. The guy managed the group. He was like, "What are you doing in this beautiful car?" I'm like, "I'm going off road." He's like, "Are you sure? Because you can use one of ours." And then they look like Mad Max cars. I'm like, "No, no, 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 we're going to do this." And he was shocked.
Wow. Well, it's great because the Defender has been reimagined for 21st century adventure, and its unparalleled off-road ability as well as its robust interior are invaluable whether you're headed towards uncharted territory or just a weekend of exploration. The Defender 110 tackles challenging surroundings with absolute confidence. The SUV conveys strength outside and in, featuring peerless technology like an intuitive driver display and an award-winning infotainment system. That's my favorite part, to keep you connected no matter where the journey takes you. Adventure is unique to everyone, and so is the Defender. Choose from the two-door Defender 90, the four-door Defender 110, or the larger Defender 130 with the ability to seat up to 8 passengers. You'll find uncompromising performance in all three. So pack up and go even further with the Defender 110. Learn more at LandRoverUSA.com/Defender.
These days, we're all investors, trying to be smart with our money despite our worst impulses. But at iShares, we believe that deep down inside of every investor is a better investor. One that's just waiting to be let out. Explore iShares ETFs and insights and let your best investor out. Visit iShares.com for more information.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show.
So we were talking about Jay buying a Tesla and how it turns out that there's a market for Teslas now that are so hot that if he sold his Tesla, he'd make $8,000 off the Tesla that he just bought. And so, James and I were saying you should just go out and buy a ton of Teslas and try to flip them. Turns out Tesla is anticipating that and they will ban you. But then James said, but then the market is at some point going to crash and you're going to be stuck with 100 Teslas. And so what that made me think of was one of my favorite historical figures. Have you ever heard of Emperor Joshua Norton?
Is that the Emperor of San Francisco?
Yes, the Emperor of San Francisco.
You might have told me this story a long time ago.
Oh,
but tell it, because I have no idea.
Okay, we've spoken enough that I'm repeating my stories now. So this guy, Joshua Norton, he is South African and moves to San Francisco. This is early mid 1800s, and he comes to make his fortune. And he's a businessman, and he's doing pretty well. And then he gets this hot tip: there is a rice shortage in San Francisco. And so the price of rice has skyrocketed. And he's aware of a boat coming to San Francisco with rice. So he decides to buy it all at this incredibly inflated price. And he figures that he's just going to make a ton selling rice. And so the boat arrives and he gets his rice. And then unexpectedly, a whole bunch of other boats with rice arrive and the price of rice drops and he loses all his money and he disappears for a while. And then he reemerges on the scene when he walks into a newspaper in San Francisco and hands them a declaration declaring himself Emperor of the United States. And he's wearing like a kind of tattered army uniform. And newspapers at the time, these are just free-flowing enterprises. They decide to run this thing, so they do. And then people start treating him as the emperor. He's basically a homeless person, right? Like he's living in some kind of shabby housing, but he is charming. And he starts writing other declarations that newspapers start running. And then because people love his declarations, additional newspapers, because, this is like at a time when every city had like 15 newspapers. So other newspapers start running like their own made up declarations from him because they just want to be in on the action. And he becomes this figure this kind of figure of lore, and people start treating him like the emperor. He eventually adds a new title, which is he is Emperor of the United States and Protector of Mexico. And he is invited to preside over local functions. He starts issuing bonds that people buy. And then when the Transcontinental Railroad is built, newspaper reporters from around the country come out to San Francisco to report back on what is out there, because it used to be so hard to travel west. And they arrive in San Francisco, and they basically ask, like, what is there to see here? And everyone introduces them to the emperor, and so then he becomes a kind of national figure for a while, and then he just sort of abruptly dies in the late 1800s. And I love this story because I feel like he's one of the very earliest versions of this phenomenon that we have in America, which is people just declaring themselves famous and then being famous as a result, right? I mean, like, sometimes all you have to do is really um, position yourself and own it. And if you are creating enough of a story that people want to be part of, they will join you. And that is the legacy of Emperor Norton.
So that's interesting, because what lessons can we get from that? For instance, is this a random phenomenon, like in the sense that maybe 1,000 people declare themselves emperor or king or Jesus or something, and he's
Mhm.
the one that by luck kind of organically survived that first wave of oh, I'm famous, and everyone's saying no, you aren't, but then he did become famous? Or is there
Yeah.
something he did that we could learn from, as like, hey, if I want to sort of monetize who I am, this, and people
Mhm.
to listen to me, even though I've not really accomplished anything. I wonder if there's something he did that was a little out of the ordinary, that he probably had a lot of self-confidence. He's probably a little insane.
Right. Definitely a little insane. That's a really good question. So part of this must be left to speculation because the majority of the records about Emperor Norton have been lost because there was a fire in San Francisco, and most things were lost. So I once tried to write a book about him, but there just wasn't enough
Really?
surviving information to put together like a full narrative. Oh yeah, like I spent a long time in like the microfiche room in the New York Public Library. But I think that you're onto something here, and it is true that there's not a formula such that you could always create success out of absolute nothing. Otherwise, everyone would declare themselves emperor and everyone would be treated as emperor. But I think the lesson is that storytelling matters perhaps more than anything else. And if you give people a story that they love, that they feel good participating in, then you can bring them along in a journey of your own defining. And I think that people misunderstand how important storytelling is. You see people trying to make arguments based on just data alone or emotion alone, and I think that the most compelling people in our world are storytellers, and it's the reason why I think it was Plato had argued actually that fiction should be regulated by the state because he saw it as such a powerful force that it shouldn't just be in anybody's hands. There's something I think that for everybody, when they're trying to think about how they can be more convincing or get what they want or bring people along, that they have to think about the story that they tell and how that story can shape people's understanding of them in a way in which people want to be a part of that story too.
I think that's really true, and I think we've lost track of that with the rise of the internet, because essentially right now everyone writes, but there are still few writers. So like everyone could
Mm,
write a post on Facebook, an article on LinkedIn or Medium, a caption on Instagram or Twitter, but and people sometimes write many articles, but they're not quite writers. They've never really developed the skill of writing, even though they're writing a lot. And a part of that is because they forget what you just said, which is that more important than presenting a persuasive argument with data is the ability to tell lots of stories. Like, you have this, whether instinctively or through training or through self-training. Like, I read your book, your most recent book, which we're going to talk about, Build for Tomorrow. It's you have it down. Like, the whole book is filled with stories. You make a
yeah.
point and then you tell 5 stories about that point. That's the way to write. And then the ability to write well comes down to, can you tell a good story? Not, do you have the most amazing ideas, because the most amazing ideas sometimes are left in the dust. Although if you have both, which your books do, you succeed. Emperor Norton has storytelling. he's also somewhat safe, right? Like he's not presenting a danger to anyone who acknowledges him as emperor. Like if someone went around and saying Donald Trump should be emperor, he's going to have people who love him and people who hate him. So, but this guy is safe.
Yeah.
He's not saying you need to bow down to me or anything. I'm just saying I'm emperor.
That's a really great point. Right. He's not. That's right, because his position of emperor really only enhances people's lives. Right. Well, first of all, he had no power, so it's it's easier to love someone when they have no power because they pose no threat to you, but also because you get to, if you're the person who wants to buy into the Emperor Norton's story, in some way, right? You're not fooling yourself. You don't actually think that he's the emperor, but you want to enjoy that story. And I think the reason you enjoy the story is because it brings something to you. It contributes to you, right? It adds to your life because you love having this character in your world. You love being able to interact with this person. And therefore, you want the story to be true.
Yeah, and maybe his personality was a little bit larger than life, so everybody liked being around him somehow.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to think. Like I've been playing around with this idea that for every story I hear and every experience I have, I want 3 lessons from it. And so the first one's really important, which is always be storytelling. And he created an interesting story that sometimes, by the way, you don't have to be safe. I don't think being safe is the lesson. There's something else there because dangerous also gets picked up by the media.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you see that on social media all the time. Someone's controversial, that often you'll create more polarization, but you'll also get lots of views and hits.
Yeah. So we need 2 more lessons about Emperor Norton.
Yeah, we need 2 more because it's an important story. It's a good example. He probably monetized it. Like you said, he sold bonds. He went from
Yes.
homeless to making a living because
Right.
of this weird fictional tale he told about himself that people knew it wasn't true, but he became like a mascot. Like so, and the phrase mascot kind of implies some sort of tribe of some sort. Like the New York Yankees have a mascot and people love it if you're in the tribe of fans of New York Yankees. So he became like sort of like this weird mascot for San Francisco that if you came to San Francisco as a journalist, you had to meet the emperor. Oh, you need to meet the emperor.
Right.
So he was like San Francisco's mascot, who's also a safe and almost humorous figure like this guy.
Yeah.
So you need to symbolize something.
Yeah, it was all right. So I'll take a stab at lesson number 2, which is that you must stand for something. Right? You cannot stand for nothing. Emperor Norton, I think another reason people loved him is because he made these declarations. And
What would they say?
oh, well, so some of them were about the politics of the day. I mean, he was living through the Civil War era, so there was a lot to say. But also, a lot of them were very localized. For example, he one of his declarations banned the term Frisco to refer to San Francisco. He thought that was inappropriate. And then there was another one where he had declared that San Francisco should build a bridge, and then they did. I can't remember if it was the Golden Gate Bridge or another bridge, but it was, and one had nothing to do with the other. But he was making stands. He was taking stands on things that people could agree or disagree with, and they didn't feel threatened by them, right? I mean, if you ban the term Frisco, it starts a conversation. But I think that it gives people a reason to love and support him because he's now telling a story, and he's also representing something that, in a way, amplifies something that they believe in. I don't know. What do you think about that as a lesson?
Yeah, because so what's happening is, and this confirms the mascot theory, is that he specifically identified himself, even though he's calling himself the Emperor of the United States, he specifically identified himself with San Francisco. And he made statements that are almost funny, but people could buy into it. Like, oh, don't use the word Frisco. And I'm assuming the reason is because San Francisco is the greatest city ever. And we need to refer to it by we need to show respect for this beautiful city that we live in. And so everyone's like, oh, this is funny. But yeah, of course, San Francisco. And so it's like he's playing that role of mascot. And then I will say the third thing is he probably was very consistent. Like you said, he over time made all these proclamations. And it's like decades later, he's selling bonds. And he's acting like the emperor of San Francisco, essentially, rather than the United States. So he's this mascot theory, which I didn't think of before, and this consistency, which is very important. Like you can't just write one article because then if he just came into the office and said, "Oh, I'm the emperor," and then he disappeared again, that would be the end of him. but
Yeah.
instead they like became eager for his proclamations because so many people probably liked the first one. Like, and probably he was a funny or a good writer.
Yeah, I think that's great. You know, it's funny. I had I had another third lesson, which I'll throw to you, which is people love an underdog. So you know, it was the reason they love him is because he was not emperor. I mean, it's you know, if somebody has great power over you, people don't always love you. It's always been interesting to watch that. For example, with our cultural responses to the tech industry. You know, when the tech industry was small and scrappy, when Mark Zuckerberg was a college kid who was going to disrupt everything, he was on magazine covers being called the boy wonder, and now people say he's an evil monster. And you know, a part of that is because people love the ascension. And they don't really love what happens when you're in a position where you can get blamed for things that have gone wrong. And so with Emperor Norton, I mean, it was very clear that this was basically a kind of charming, semi-homeless man who people could love.
And there might be one more thing too, which
Yeah,
is you mentioned in the very first part of the story that he essentially tried to corner the market on rice and went
yeah,
broke.
right.
And this sort of people love the ascension, but people also love the descent.
Yes.
and and I was looking the other day. I was looking at it. I did an Ask Me Anything in June 2013 on Reddit,
Hmm.
and it became very popular. There was like 10,000 comments or something, and it showed up for some reason on Google. Like someone actually put a comment on it after all these years, and I looked at it, and a lot of the Ask Me Anything was about I went broke after making like tens of millions, and fell to zero. I was talked about the rise and fall and rise and fall, and
Hmm.
people like genuinely I got reactions that I don't even get right now. Like it was surprised how many people liked me
Hmm.
on this thing. And so people really do love those types of stories. And maybe that story was known about him and that contributed as well. So he was safe in that sense. This wasn't like some powerful figure suddenly declaring himself emperor. This is a guy who was more down and out than anybody could ever be. So they another reason to feel safe liking him.
Yeah, that's a great point because that's the part that's relatable, right? Like the part, you know, you have a lot of things in your life, for example, that are not relatable. You've had degrees of success that most people have not, but everyone can relate to the stuff that went wrong, and everyone can relate to that feeling of I've got to try to turn this around, and that I think is a reason why people connected so much with and continue to with that part of your journey. And why when you're open about that, I think that you know you really bring people to you. And I think that you make a great point about that being a part of his story too, because if people understand that, then they see someone who, although he's pursuing life in a colorful and unique way, has gone through something that they either have gone through or could imagine themselves going through. And that's the part that people connect with. And I mean, you and I've talked about this before that oftentimes the greatest mistake people make when they're telling their story is they skip over the hard part. They want to tell a story that goes from I set out to do something to I succeeded, and they skip the part where everything went wrong. But where everything went wrong is that's the entry point. That's actually where people connect with you.
Right. That's really important. And again, that's the internet has created these platforms, and this is a good thing I think in general, but it's created these platforms where anybody can write. And again, people don't know this basic of storytelling, which is that there has to be conflict in a story, and it has to happen pretty quickly. I think the best thriller writers on the very first page, there's a murder or a jailbreak or a kidnapping or whatever, and you're sucked in right away. Whereas I think people who kind of brag in their writing, which is a lot of people, that writing always falls flat unless
Hmm.
they're already like big and famous and everybody's being nice to them for other reasons. Like I see this a lot in books written. I interview a lot of billionaires. Some write
Yeah.
good books, but some just don't know how to. Their ghostwriters don't know how to write a book about this guy because maybe someone's always been successful and they don't know how to get the conflict out there. And some of these books are horrible. But we're talking about a very good book, which is your book. And this segues nicely into some aspects of your book. So, your book's called Build for Tomorrow, an action plan for embracing change, adapting fast, and future proofing your career. And so, the first thing I'm curious about, and it kind of just occurred to me right before we got on the Zoom, a lot of times I write a book not because I'm an expert in something, because I'm trying to solve my own problems. So let's say I wrote a book, for instance, called The Power of No. And I
Mhm.
wrote it because I couldn't say no to people. And so through my own exploration of how people say no and how I started to learn to say no, I was able to write this book. So I'm just curious, did this book was it just an interesting thing for you, like Emperor Norton, or did this book solve some problem that was really causing you great anxiety?
So it's a great question. This book, the writing of this book didn't solve that problem, but the learning of everything that's in the book did solve the problem. Um, because I wrote this book after years of talking to people about this very subject and spending time with people who think in just a completely different way than I do. Or did, I suppose, because I really feel like I've calibrated my brain differently as a result of spending so much time with entrepreneurs. And it it enabled me to think differently about my own work and how to solve problems. I mean, so the book is really centered around this question of how the most successful people adapt. Because what I found is that like the ability to navigate change, the ability to see opportunity in chaos, uh, is the thing that drives people's success. And so I want to understand how they do that.
But I would say there was a little bit more there
Yeah.
because, for instance, right in the center of the book, like literally dead center in the book, is the story of Blockbuster.
Yes.
And by the way, I do appreciate one thing in the book is that it deserves more thinking. I have to think about it. But you take these one-line stories like, oh, Blockbuster fell apart because it didn't appreciate the future and Netflix killed it. You
Yeah.
take these sort of stories that are much more complex, get filtered down so that it's almost like a Darwinism of stories, so that the one line that describes the situation completely is the one that's most appealing to people. So people love that one line story.
Hmm.
But you say it's much more complicated, much more nuanced. I did not know that. So I really appreciate that from the book. And you described it for other stories, including Ford Motor Company. But Blockbuster is interesting because you're the editor in chief of Entrepreneur Magazine. And one kind of prevailing theme in society right now is that all print media is dead or
Yeah.
is on its way to being dead. And so I'm wondering if an anxiety for you was, look, everybody keeps telling me. I go to Thanksgiving dinner, and even my aunts and uncles are telling
Mhm.
me, "Well, what are you doing in a magazine? Print media is dead." And and so probably like as you're confronted with the Blockbuster problem every single day, and maybe that created anxiety for you that you wanted to move past.
So yeah, that's a great reading, and it's true that that question of what am I still doing at a print magazine, which is such an old thing at a time in which there's so much disruption, and also I'm a guy who now talks about and champions exactly that. How does that compute? So let me go through a few answers to that. Number one, know that I come from a place of fear of change. Like I was the kid who would always say that the band's first album was the best and that everything after was terrible. Right. Like I was I literally slept with my childhood blanket through college, and my mom kept buying me. This is a slightly embarrassing story, but my mom kept buying. Like she bought a nicer blanket, and she kept putting it on my bed, and I kept putting it away and taking this like childhood blanket out. And the thing is, I think that what I was doing was I was trying to hold on to things that were comfortable because I didn't know what it meant to redefine myself, to try something new. It felt like shedding an identity and then starting from scratch, and that's scary. And I see that in other people that they equate change with loss. They see something new and they immediately say, "This is the thing that I'm going to lose," rather than saying, "This is something that I can gain."
And you mentioned this is an evolutionary phenomenon that people fear change is an evolutionary response because I guess if you know exactly where all the threatening animals and tribes are in a 5 mile radius of where your tribe is located, if suddenly your tribe has to move, it's scary because you have to relearn everything
Yeah, I think that's a great point.
or you could die.
And this is why also you know you find, I mean, psychological research for decades has confirmed what we call loss aversion theory, which is that we are always focused more on avoiding loss than we are on what we gain. And even if we have an experience in which we gain something, we will tend to focus on what we might not have gained as much of. I bought 2 Bitcoin when they were $4,000 each, and then I sold those Bitcoin when they were $16,000, which meant that I made money. But I felt bad about it, and I still do, because I could have made so much more money. Right? I was so focused on the thing that I had lost. You're right. This is baked right into us. So one of the things I think we need to do when we're trying to navigate these experiences is we need to establish a purpose for ourselves and a purpose for our actions, such that we understand where we're going and how to plot a path forward, even as the things around us feel chaotic. So with the you bringing up the print magazine thing is a really good one, because I'll tell you how I've thought through that. I get asked that question a fair amount, and so I was really pushing myself to evaluate, what am I doing, and am I doing something smart? And I came to this question that I started asking about the print magazine, and then I started asking about literally everything that I do, and I found that asking it was incredibly clarifying. So I'll tell you the question. It's a really simple one. What is it for? I literally devote a whole page to this in the book. Like, I just write, what is it for, on a page, so that you can tear it out and slap it on a wall, because I think it's such an important question.
And people often don't ask that of themselves.
Yeah. So if I were to ask, what is content for? Well, decades ago, when print media reigned, you would say that content is for monetization. It's simple 2 ways to make money off of it. You can run ads against it, or you can sell subscriptions to it. Either way, you make money. But now we're in a pretty disrupted environment. There's a lot of people making amazing, content. I don't really love the word content, because it makes ideas feel like widgets, but for lack of anything else, I'll say content. And it's free. Like, this podcast is free. And so that really disrupts the model that content had before. So it's now worth asking again, because the question stays the same, but the answer will always change. What is content for? Now, I think I have an answer to that, which is, content is for relationships, because people trust you when you produce good content. When you create something that they find valuable, they transfer that appreciation to you. And then you can build off of that. You can build products and services, for example, that they will buy from you because they trust you, because of the content.
That's very true.
So that's the reason.
As I personally experienced over and over again.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, anybody who produces things that go out into the world, even if those things themselves don't have a price tag on them, they will discover that they build these relationships, and those relationships are incredibly valuable. So that is now the answer to that question. So why do we make a print magazine? I mean, look, the dollars and cents of it is that Entrepreneur Magazine, the print magazine, does make money. It doesn't make the kind of money that I'm sure it made decades ago. It's now a part of a larger, suite of products that Entrepreneur Media produces. But its primary purpose, I think, isn't the money that it makes. It is the relationship that it builds, because it's out there in the world. It's on newsstands. People pick it up. They establish a relationship with the brand. I see a benefit to that, because they establish relationships with me. And as long as that continues to make sense, there's a reason to do this. Now, as you ask that question, what is it for, of everything that you do, you will start to gain clarity about what things are worth doing and what aren't, and how to think about them and build off of them. Because if we at Entrepreneur can recognize, and this is a conversation we have all the time, that content builds relationships and that the relationships are monetizable, well, that leads to new ideas, to new products and services that we can produce, new ways to engage people to make money that way. And it weans us off of a increasingly challenging, advertising environment that is not where we want to put all of our chips.
Yeah, and look, just to be clear, also, you have a thriving website. It's, in real time updated, like, you got the stock market and stuff like that.
Yeah.
What other stuff do you do? Do you sell? Have you gotten into subscription letters, for instance?
At Entrepreneur Media?
Yeah.
So Entrepreneur Media, a heavy growth space for us is the franchise world, because there's a legacy there. Entrepreneur Media came out of the franchise world, and it's still a big part of our coverage. And there's a lot of opportunity there, offering consulting services, both for franchisees looking for, potential franchisees looking for what brand they should join, to franchisors trying to find franchisees. So we're exploring a lot in that space with products and services. We've gotten into consulting a bit, sort of direct consulting services, and there's a lot in the pipeline that I can't share yet.
I feel like you would make a lot of money selling. Like, I see your franchise stuff.
Yeah.
I feel like you would get a lot of money becoming almost like a marketplace for digital information about franchising. So, like,
Yeah.
whether it's a course or
Hmm.
get notified of local but running existing franchises that are now available, because those are often very lucrative to acquire.
Yeah.
It seems like people would pay. People who are in the franchise business would pay a good number for information like that.
Yeah, and we're finding that, and we're leaning really heavily into it. And and again, that all comes out of, to go back to the thing, it all comes out of that question, what is it for? Because if you understand that the content that we produce about franchising builds a trust in the franchise community with us, then it establishes us as an authority in that space, and then we can find endless ways in which to serve that community. And that's the power here, right? I mean, I think that one of the things we need to do is recognize that everything that we do is going to change. And so what we need to do is build in systems so that we're aware of it, and we're able to identify the new opportunities there. Because one of the great things in business in particular is that disruption just creates opportunity. All right. Needs never go away. It's not like people don't stop needing things, they don't stop needing solutions. And so when there is a disruption, the pandemic proved this perfectly. When there's a disruption, people have new needs, and some of the legacy providers of those needs, the incumbents who people used to turn to, are going to be disrupted themselves. They're not going to be able to serve people as well. And that means that you have the opportunity to recognize how to be of value to people and step up and provide it. And that's why the more time that I spend with entrepreneurs, the more I see that they see these moments of disruption as an opportunity, as a time to say, all right, let's step back, reevaluate. What do we have? What is our core value that does not change, even in changeable times? And then what do people need now? And the more you can think through that in just a clear, coherent, non panicky way, the more you can see what your competitive advantage actually is.
You know what I love about fantasy sports is that even though I'm not going to be a great basketball player or a baseball player or a football player or whatever, I feel like I get to participate and make decisions and use my knowledge of these different leagues or these different sports to compete. So it's like I can pick my team or I can pick my favorite players, and I could use my knowledge to make predictions and maybe even make money. So with the basketball season here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League on Prize Picks. This is a league created specifically for combo projections that include two or more players from different sports or leagues. Want to play alongside some of Prize Picks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and comedian Andrew Schultz, who's also been a guest on this podcast, and I've been a guest on his? You can now find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries for some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community each week. Look, Prize Picks even offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. What? So I love playing it. I love anywhere where I can use analytical ability with my interests to demonstrate some skill and maybe make some money. And I like the game like aspect. I do wish they had chess as a category on prizepicks.com, but I'll settle for what they've got. Maybe I should make my own fantasy chess league. But in any case, I love Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/James. Use code James for a first deposit match up to $100. That's the easiest $100 you're ever going to make. So that's prizepicks.com/James and use code James. Daily fantasy sports made easy. the future of learning is definitely online. Like, it's such BS that you have to spend $200,000 or take $200,000 in loans and go to some fancy school when it's useless. It doesn't guarantee you a job. Most employers, including me, do not care about degrees or grades or anything like that. We want to care that you love what you're doing, that you know what you're doing, in some cases that you have experience or that you're willing to learn. But people in general love learning and are curious. Like, the key to success is curiosity. And I think masterclass.com is the perfect model for online learning. I'm really happy they're sponsoring this episode. If you're going to give a gift, give the gift of learning. Masterclass makes a meaningful gift this season for you and anyone on your list, because both of you can learn from the best to become your best, from leadership to effective communication to cooking. Let me tell you some of the classes I've taken. I've taken comedy from Steve Martin. I mean, can you believe I can take a class from Steve Martin on comedy, or Judd Apatow, my favorite comedy director? I could take an actual class from him on writing. Wolfgang Puck on cooking. Dan Brown on writing, or Judy Bloom, who's been on this podcast, on writing. By the way, Wolfgang Puck also has been on this podcast. It's such a pleasure. I try to take classes all the time from masterclass.com. And whether you're watching Masterclass on TV or listening in audio mode in the app or on their site, the quality speaks for itself. It's like these masterclass instructors are your own personal mentors that are going to help you reach the next level. How much would it cost to take one-on-one classes on comedy from Steve Martin or on chess from Gary Kasparov? You just wouldn't be able to do it. But it would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. With a masterclass annual membership, it's $10 a month. Memberships start at $120 a year for unlimited access to one-on-one classes with all 180 plus masterclass instructors. So it's not just $120 for one instructor. You get all 180 plus masterclass instructors. Boost your confidence and find practical takeaways you can apply to your life and at work. And if you own a business or are a team leader, use Masterclass to empower and create future-ready employees and leaders. That's the real education in today's world. So this holiday season, you can give one annual membership and get one free at masterclass.com/JAS. JAS, of course, stands for the James Altucher Show. So right now you can get two memberships for the price of one at masterclass.com/JAS. Masterclass.com/JAS. Offer terms apply. It's so interesting because there's lots of different types of businesses. So, you take a company like Uber, they solved a major problem, particularly in cities, or actually even not cities, where it's hard to get a cab sometimes. And here, right from my phone, I can get like a deluxe car, pick me up in the rain when there's no cabs, and take me home. Or I could get a
Yeah.
ride to the airport at 4 in the morning if I live in some, rural area, because I could schedule an Uber the night before. It's a major problem. It like changed life for everybody.
Mhm.
But then there's like companies that solve basic problems, like a laundromat solves a basic problem, but not necessarily you don't have to be unique. Sometimes you have to be the only one. Maybe you're unique in a location. You're the only laundromat on a block in the city,
Yeah.
and it solves that problem. And then so there's kind of like a range of problems, and like your Entrepreneur magazine, a magazine for entrepreneurs doesn't necessarily solve a problem, that because there's other location is not as important because of the internet, and there are many resources and websites out there for entrepreneurs. So you have to distinguish yourself with content. As you mentioned earlier, content is what helps Entrepreneur magazine build a direct relationship with its customers, a loyal customer base, a loyal reader base. But also, you mentioned you came out of the franchising business. You were a magazine originally about franchising. That's what people thought of as entrepreneurship, is if you owned your own McDonald's. And that probably did solve a problem, because information was relatively rare 30 years ago, however old Entrepreneur magazine is. And
Mhm.
you
40
solved the
something.
problem. And that, yeah. So 30 is like the new 40. Like, I'm sure it was 40 years ago, because I remember seeing it in the 80s. But, 30 years ago is like my adult life. So anything that was 40 years ago has become 30 years of my life.
Yeah.
So, but you solved a real problem for people, which is like, how can I find out more about this franchising stuff? People are getting rich from it. So that was the problem Entrepreneur Magazine started off solving. Then you had to adapt and become this content machine about entrepreneurship. And then you had to adapt further by making a website where probably most of your content now is viewed via the website.
Right. So this is a great setup because I want to make sure that, people appreciate that the things that we're talking about for business can apply to the way that you think about yourself as an individual too.
This is what I appreciated most about the book. First off, I looked back at my own life and I saw this is the exact format how I've solved problems in my own life over the decades. And I never put it in as concise a way as you did in the first chapter where you sketch out your four
Yeah.
things. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, no,
How I solve things for me.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. Yeah, and I just wanted to say that because I think that the way that you set up and the way that you were just talking about the evolution of a company like Entrepreneur Media tracks really well, I think, with the way that an individual can think about what their own value is. Because I think that one of the things that we need to do as individuals or as companies when we're going through times of change is we need to be sure that we're defining what is so deep in our core? What is the mission that we have such that it is unchangeable in times of change, right? We have to define this thing about ourselves that is separate from the product or the service that we do. We have a problem as individuals, which is that we identify too closely with the output of our work. We say, I'm a whatever, right? I'm a project manager. I'm a newspaper reporter. I'm a something, which is fine until your job changes, you lose your job, and now you don't have an identity anymore because you spent so long identifying with the output of your work. So I realized that when I was talking to entrepreneurs who were going through major changes, they had done this thing. They may not have even been aware that they had done it, but I just heard it often enough where they would say to me a description of what they do that is divorced from the product that they have, like from the way that they do it. So I talked to the CEO of a company called Foodsters that makes baking mixes, and they were going through a big change, and it was challenging. And anyway, but he said, our mission is to bring joy to people with upgraded sweet baked goods. And I thought, well, that is brilliant, right? Because that's not tied to any one kind of product. Bring joy to people with upgraded sweet bake. It doesn't matter what you make. You make baking mixes one day, and maybe if sales of baking mixes plummet, you pivot into something else because that's not your thing. You're not a baking mix company. You bring joy to people, and everybody can have some version of that for themselves. You should come up with like a sentence, a single sentence for yourself that defines your mission that is separate from the actual thing that you do that could be changed. So for me, for example, I say that I tell stories in my own voice, right? I'm not a magazine editor. I'm not a book author. I'm not a podcast. I mean, I do all these things. But what is my mission? I tell stories in my own voice. The reason for that is because if I get off this call with you and I check my email and it turns out that Entrepreneur Magazine has decided to kick me to the curb, that'll suck, but it doesn't take my core mission away because I have something that does not change even in times of change. And that's very similar to what you were describing with the company a few minutes ago, where you were describing how it evolved to meet people's new needs, because ultimately it wasn't a company that produced a magazine, or it wasn't a company that helped people with franchising or or whatever it is now. It was always a company that if you distill it down, you could say, and I haven't really thought about this for Entrepreneur Media, but off the top of my head, I would say this is a brand that helps people build opportunity, right? And if you define it that way, well, then how you do it is agnostic. You do it in every possible way that you can. And it doesn't really matter if the marketplace shifts because people will always need someone who can help them build opportunity.
That's really true. And, and for you, the way you described your own, what is it for? I don't think that is how you describe yourself. And far be it from me to tell you how you describe yourself, but in the book, you describe yourself as someone who helps people. You say, I don't identify as a magazine
Yeah.
publisher or editor, but I am someone who helps people adapt. And And I think what you described as telling stories in your own voice, that's your method of doing it, which is a
Mm.
very successful method.
Mhm.
But you really do help people solve a problem, like you're doing in this book, like you've done in other books. Is I think even like in your other podcasts and other stories, you tell either stories of people who have gone through significant changes, or aka adaptations in their
Yeah.
lives, whether it's like because you've told all sorts of stories in different podcasts and stuff, or you help people deal with financial changes as they go through different phases of their life. Like you've had
Mhm.
podcasts with Nicole that we've talked about,
Yeah.
where it's more of like financial guidance. And I actually don't even know. Are you still doing that podcast? I love talking about it.
Yeah, no, thanks. It's on hiatus right now, but we have plans to bring it back once once I get through the book launch and all the craziness. I'm
Sure.
like at max capacity. But yeah, no, I appreciate that, and that's because I spent a lot of time trying to figure out. Here was my journey to that very specific thing. Like why am I talking to you about adaptability? Why did I write a book about this? It really stems from this observation that I had at the very beginning of my time at Entrepreneur Magazine, um, which was so this weird thing happened where I became editor in chief of Entrepreneur, and I started getting invited to speak at events, and I started getting invited to be interviewed on podcasts. And that was not stuff that I was doing before, because prior to that I was just a magazine editor, right? I've worked at all sorts of magazines, and as a magazine editor, you're just one of many. And then suddenly I was being treated as different. And people started asking me this question wherever I went, which was, what are the qualities of a successful entrepreneur? And I was wondering, why am I getting the same question over and over again? It's weird. There's not a coordinated effort here. Like, why are people asking me the same question? And then I realized it's because if you listen closely to the questions that people ask you, you discover that what they're really doing is telling you what they think your value is to them. And if you
Mm,
understand what people think your value is, if you understand what people think, you are an authority on, then you're halfway to solving problems for them, because you know what they're going to trust you to provide. And so I felt like, well, okay, why are they asking me that? And I realized the answer is because they see me as a pattern matcher. I get to talk to lots of people because of my role. I get to talk to incredibly successful people, and therefore I can see patterns among them. So that's why they assume that I have this answer. And so I thought, well, I better have this answer, because if I can have this answer, then I can really mean something to them, more than just a guy who makes a magazine. And that sent me on this quest to find the answer to that. And I spent a lot of time talking to people, and kind of trying to track people's journeys and understand the thing that seemed to drive success. And I zeroed in on this answer, which was that the most successful people are adaptable. And then I felt like, well, if I can understand the answer to how they do it, then I have something that I can offer other people. And that's what I started to build, what you might call like my personal brand around. And again, it all came out of listening to questions that people ask me, because it's so powerful.
And then you did very well what I call the spoken wheel technique. So the wheel is, you know, how am I going to help people adapt better? And then the spokes, this is what really, allows you to, build something that can move literally,
Hmm.
and create your own personal brand. So you're not just tied down to one job or one possibility or one opportunity.
Right.
Like you started multiple podcasts, you've written multiple books, you speak to audiences, you do consulting. You're a go-to person for people now to really ask this question: how can I was even thinking of advice I would ask you for. It's funny because I figured, oh, I'm not going to do that on the podcast, but it did run through my head like, oh, love to be able to talk to Jason at some point about X, Y, and Z,
Happy
because you have
anytime.
created, yeah, and I appreciate that, and you have created this expertise, because not everyone gets a chance to talk to, the most amazing entrepreneurs in the world, and you're very fortunate. Not only have you been able to talk to these people, but then to translate it to something usable to everyone, including me. Like, and I just want to read these 4 stages of adaptation that you write about throughout the book, but in the introduction, you mentioned them specifically.
Yeah.
You call them panic, adaptation, new normal, wouldn't go back. And I would say every major change in my life had to do with, did start with panic. Like, and I didn't realize that until I read it in your book. Like, of course, there were times when things were going bad for me when I panicked quite correctly and I changed my life. But there were times when I could have easily been complacent, but instead I panicked about being complacent. And I was,
Yeah.
when I went to grad school for computer science at Carnegie Mellon. So I lived in Pittsburgh. And when I was thrown out of graduate school, I stayed there because all my friends were there and I got an easy programming job and whatever. But then I realized, then about 2 years later, I panicked. I realized, oh, all of my friends are going to get PhDs and leave and be very successful and leave me. And I'm not going to know anybody. I'm just going to be an older and older guy who got thrown out of grad school and never moved on.
Yeah.
So I panicked and then started to, ultimately that led to me taking a job at HBO and moving to New York. So I adapted. Then there was a new normal, which was me at HBO. And then, of course I wouldn't go back. But then of course I started panicking over the next thing, which is, on and on. I could say this about every stage of my life. But your formula here worked. And I would say the panic now could be rather than something that comes to me, meaning, oh, I lost everything, so now I'm panicking. You could kind of self-create the panic if you want that next phase in your life. You should panic about complacency every now and then, not every day, but every now and then.
Yeah, I love that. I love how you saw yourself in that, and that's my goal here. And so I've learned to develop ideas out loud, and that's because I find that they become most refined if I kind of if I speak if I speak out a thing that I'm thinking about over and over again with lots of different people, right? So then what I get is the benefit of their responses and either their validation or them saying, that isn't quite right. And so as I came to that realization about the 4 phases of change, panic, adaptation, new normal, and wouldn't go back, what I did is I just started telling that story to a lot of people. And I might have even had different language for it for a while. And somebody would say, it's funny you describe it that way, but I actually think I describe it this way. And I said, oh, that's really interesting. And so I eventually got to a place with it after talking about it enough where now I felt comfortable putting it down on page, knowing that people like you would read it and say, that rings true to me. It's a great validation of it. And also I want to say, you describing that just made me think of something that you had said much earlier in our conversation. I wanted to pick back up on, which was about the storytelling in the book, because I want to share something that I've learned about storytelling that I think can help others. Because so number one, you'll notice that as I wanted to find a way to help orient people in change, and that thing that you just told there, panic, adaptation, new normal, wouldn't go back, is a story, right? It is a story that I came up with to it. I mean, it is at once, I think, true, but it's also, I'm telling it in a way in which it has a kind of narrative arc to it, and so people can find themselves in it, and it's a journey that they can go through. And I have found that if I want to communicate an idea to people and I want to make people connect with that idea, that I need to do a few things. I need to have a big idea with a name, which in this case is the 4 phases of change, but in the book there's like a ton of others. And then after that, I need to show how it applies to somebody else, right? Tell the story of somebody else. And then as often as possible, I also then tell the story of myself, learning about how to handle this or navigate this or experience this or whatever. And the reason I do that is because I want to be the reader. Like I want to be able to step in and kind of start from the reader's point of view, which is to say, I'm a person learning this myself. Now I'm a few steps ahead of it than you because I'm already familiar with it and I've already thought about it. And so here's what I've done and here's what I've experienced. I want to give you access to my thoughts. So big idea with the name plus story of somebody else doing it plus story of me doing it. I found that when I do that, people get it. They get the idea and they can see themselves in it and they remember it.
So wait, what are those 3 types of stories again? Story of someone else doing it, story of you doing it.
Yeah. And then big idea with a name.
And I think that's key. Like, it's funny. I give advice to people writing books, and I write lots of articles about writing. And I always say for each, exactly how you put it. So I'm giving you full credit, but I often tell people this, which is for every idea, for every chapter title, you need to have a story from history that really has impressed you and a story from your own life, at least. You need those two things in every chapter. You do that very well. Like you weave your own story throughout this book. But I want to kind of get to the story that the first example we spoke about.
Yeah.
What is the real story of Blockbuster?
Right, that's right. You did. You did mention that a while ago.
Because by the way, until I read your book, I always thought, oh, Blockbuster are a bunch of losers. They let
Right.
Netflix just walk all over them.
So did I. I mean, so did I, which is why I went out to try to understand it. And so before I tell you that, let me tell you the important thing to know, like what this story represents. Well, this story represents a whole bunch of things, but so number one, you had pointed out that one of the things I do is I find these stories that people think that they know in a simple way, and then I unpack them. And the reason that I do that is because I believe that we make a mistake when we're trying to understand problems, which is that we try to simplify them. We simplify them into something that feels familiar, that feels easy to understand, that just feels right. And when we do that, we often lose the important complexity that actually enables us to understand the problem and find a solution. Or like I feel like when you simplify a problem, you inhibit your ability to come up with a meaningful solution. I mean, if you want an example, just look to Washington. But it's also it happens in business all the time, and I think that it also happens in our own personal lives, where if we want to try to understand something that's vexing us, and we come up with some very simple explanation for why somebody else sucks or something, and that's never going to get us to an actual solution because problems are complicated and solutions require actually addressing all the complications of that problem. So that's why I like to do this because I find that the more that I can dig in and understand how complex something is that we thought was simple, the more I feel like we can reveal some real understanding about it. So, okay, let's talk about Blockbuster. Um, the story that people know is a very simple one, right? Which is just like Blockbuster didn't see it coming. Like they were so focused on their own business that and they believed in it so much that they could not possibly have imagined Netflix doing direct mailing of DVDs and then pivoting into streaming, and so they were a bunch of idiots and they fell apart. And that's a very satisfying story for us to tell because, of course, if something failed because those people were a bunch of idiots, well, we're not a bunch of idiots, right? And so, we won't have that same problem. But no, it's not the issue. So, okay, the moment that really changed my understanding of this came when I found this really fascinating piece in Harvard Business Review that was written by John. I don't know how to pronounce his last name. I think it's Antioco, who was the CEO from '97 to 2007 of Blockbuster. And this was not a dumb guy. He was the CEO of Circle K. He took the company out of bankruptcy. He was the CEO of Taco Bell and turned it into the cultural giant that we know. Very successful guy. Saw a lot of opportunity in Blockbuster, and he joined there, and he saw this shift to digital coming, and he felt that Blockbuster needed to invest heavily in new ways to reach people with entertainment, but he did not have the power to do that. And by the way, I should say that before Blockbuster fell apart, it was actually quite successful under his watch. It had, under his reign, it had nearly doubled revenues to $6 billion. But as he started to pivot into digital, Viacom, which owned 80% of the company, was not interested in that, and most of the companies, or at least a significant portion of the company's shares, I don't know the exact figures, fell into the hands of Carl Icahn, famous activist investor, who was not at all interested in Blockbuster pivoting to digital, and instead was looking for ways to make fast money on this brand. And so he kind of took over the board. They started pushing ideas like putting greeting cards in stores, carrying adult movies. Could you imagine if there was like an adult section of Blockbuster? They wanted to add a deal with Barnes and Noble, which wouldn't have played out very well. And ultimately, the whole thing just collapsed. And the takeaway that I have is if you it's not fair to say Blockbuster didn't see it coming. Rather, what happened is that Blockbuster, or at least the CEO of Blockbuster at the time, and probably a lot of people who worked with him, did see it coming. They did see the change coming, and they were unable to do anything about it. Because in this case, it was a whole complicated, series of events with a lot of stakeholders. But I think that you could zoom out and say, a big problem that companies and individuals have is that they have structured themselves in a way in which they simply cannot react to change. They just can't do it because they haven't left open the door for new ideas. They haven't, if you're an individual, because they haven't spent time building new skill sets and expanding their network and thinking about what else they could, what else they could do. I remember talking years ago to a guy who was like a movie reviewer for a local newspaper. Remember, like back when local newspapers all had their own movie reviewers,
And it was a very high prestige thing to be the movie reviewer for a newspaper.
It really was. It really was.
It took a lot of work to be good at it.
Yes, until budget cuts meant that people started to say, "Wait a second! Like the movie showing in Tulsa is the same movie showing in Boston. So why do we need a local person to do this?" And those jobs got cut, and because that person had never spent any time in their career developing any other kind of writing skill set, they had literally no idea what to do. And similarly, companies often structure themselves in these ways in which they prioritize efficiency over absolutely everything else, so that the only thing that everybody, top to bottom, is incentivized to do is to be more efficient doing the thing that they're already doing, which means that the company is completely blindsided when something new comes along and consumers have new needs. So the lesson of Blockbuster is really that, number one, we cannot just say, oh, bad things happen to dumb people, because bad things can happen to us too. And that, number two, we need to make sure that our systems, our entire our structure, the way that we operate as an individual or an organization, is always taking into account that something is going to change. Because the more that we digest that and just make it part of our functioning reality, the more we will prepare for it and then have options later.
By the way, I had totally forgotten that Viacom was a big owner, and I totally had forgotten that Carl Icahn was an activist investor. And by the way, Carl Icahn's an extremely smart, ingenious guy. This is how he makes money, is taking over companies like this and unlocking, potential assets inside the company. So but he does it in a very traditional way, as you point out, and he didn't think of being like the first Netflix.
Right. And to be fair to Carl Icahn, to the degree that anybody needs to be fair to him, this is the CEO's telling of this story in Harvard Business Review. It's possible that Carl has a different telling.
But I believe that story, though. It rings true. Like I had forgotten these things, but I'm starting to remember these things as I read it and as you tell it. But Carl Icahn was also panicking and going through your process. So he was probably a shareholder of Blockbuster, and then he was panicked because the stock had probably begun falling in anticipation of, the future. And he probably bought up a controlling interest so he could make the changes he felt needed so he can make a lot of money. And his way of adapting was to kind of add more services under the existing umbrella and brand of Blockbuster, rather than looking towards taking the leap and investment into technology. Like you said, he was more short-term thinking. So I wonder how you can check yourself before you wreck yourself, so to speak. No, I had to put that in.
Yeah.
But I wonder how you can check yourself so that your method of adaptation kind of takes into account risk.
Yeah, it's a great
The risk that you
question.
could be wrong.
I mean, so one of the first things that you have to do is I think that you have to just take very seriously that disruption will come, and will come possibly in ways that you didn't predict. And therefore, if you're running a company, you need people who take that seriously, who have power, which oftentimes people don't. I mean, this is like the craziest thing to me is that large companies will create innovation departments, right? Like that doesn't make any sense to me, to create a specific department siloed off of everything else where the innovation is supposed to occur. And then oftentimes, because the innovation is seen like, oh, well, these are the people who are going to think about the future, but they're not going to think about our core business. They're often not taken that seriously when they, when they identify things or have bring new needs to the company. So you have to really integrate into into the decision-making structure at your company, people who are looking ahead at changes and who are able to recognize and take action on what the rest of the company might be missing. Now, how do you do that? Well, I'll tell you one thing that is worth doing, which is to uh, seriously consider the possibility that you don't know your consumer as well as you think that you do. Um, I had this like revelatory conversation with a friend of mine. And this was after I wrote the book, so it's not in the book, although she actually appears in the book. But anyway, so her name is Rochelle DeVoe, and she does consumer insights research, and so that means that companies hire her to interview their customers and to get to understand what people need, what they like, what they don't like, better than the company already knows, so that they can then adapt to it.
Oh my gosh, I love these clothes. Mizzen and Main. That's Mizzen and Main. It really is the most comfortable work clothes. Travel clothes. I had to travel this whole week. I'm traveling for a week and a half, and I just took Mizzen and Main clothes with me. Close out 2023 in style with comfortable, breathable, packable, and machine washable pieces from Mizzen and Main. As you wrap up your year-end goals, enjoy a Mizzen and Main dress shirt that you can wear confidently. I like that they've very, very just nice, solid colors. I don't really like to get all fancy in patterns and everything, although they do have some pattern shirts, but very comfortable clothes, stretchable pants. It's just super comfortable, but they look professional, and you can wear them casually or professionally. I like some of their flannel shirts or untuck shirts. I love untuck. I never tuck in. So again, whether you're shopping for a special someone or giving yourself the gift you really want, I just buy myself gifts. Mizzen and Main is the perfect gift for any guy who works, travels, and or cares about looking and feeling great. As you could tell by my many photos across the internet, I care about looking fantastic. I'm practically a model. And let's be honest, every guy loves to look great. So again, shop now at mizzenandmain.com and save 20% when you spend $130 or more using promo code James. That's promo code James at Mizzen and Main, Mizzen and Main.com. This is such a valuable service for all business owners, big businesses, small businesses, doesn't matter. I wish I had this in the many different businesses that I've started. Sometimes it seems like your business is humming, but then suddenly you don't understand it. You're starting to fall behind. You're not understanding where your costs are, where your revenues are, where your payments are. Teams are buried in all sorts of like BS work, and you can't seem to close the books. So you need like one dashboard, one source of truth. I'm jealous of this business, NetSuite from Oracle, of course, NetSuite by Oracle. I wish I'd come up with this idea. It's a brilliant concept to have all your business intelligence on one dashboard. This is why you need to know these three numbers: 37,000, 25, and 1. So 37,000, that's the number of businesses which have upgraded to NetSuite by Oracle. NetSuite is the number one cloud financial system, streamlining accounting, financial management, inventory, HR, and more. 25. NetSuite turns 25 this year. That's 25 years of helping businesses do more with less, close their books in days, not weeks, and drive down costs. 1, because your business is one of a kind. So you get a customized solution for all of your key performance indicators, your KPIs, in one efficient system with one source of truth. Manage risk, get reliable forecasts, and improve margins. Everything you need to grow all in one place. So right now, download NetSuite's popular KPI checklist designed to give you consistently excellent performance absolutely free at netsuite.com/James. That's netsuite.com/James to get your own KPI checklist. netsuite.com/James.
Do people respond honestly to surveys like that, or do they even know what they like and don't like? I mean, it seems like data is a better approach than surveys.
Data is important. This is not a replacement for data, and I think that data can tell you a lot. But what this is not surveys in the like fill out a form sense. This is surveys in the get people on the phone sense, and then have somebody who's trained to really deeply engage with your consumer, to have like a conversation with them about their needs and their feelings. And you gotta, like, it's slow work. It's often expensive because you gotta give somebody a $100 gift card or whatever to get them on the phone for a while. But yeah, I mean, I don't think one should be exclusive to the other. But I'll just tell you this the story that really kind of cracked this open for me. So Rochelle was telling me about how, one of the things she struggles with is convincing CEOs that they don't know their audience as well as they think they do. And I said, well, give me an example of like how there could be that breakdown, and then how a company can be transformed as a result. And she said, okay, so there's a sock company called Vim and Vigor that had hired Rochelle, and the company had been started by an athlete, and this woman who founded it, she needed compression socks for her own athletics, and she had seen a need in her athletic peers, and so she created this company for compression socks for athletes, and assumed that athletes were their market, and the company grew pretty steadily for a while, and then growth just plateaued. They could not figure out what was going on, and so they brought Rochelle in. So Rochelle has this process by which she identifies a company's best customers by all sorts of metrics, right? Like who's buying the most, who's the most engaged, who's leaving great reviews, because you want to understand who these people are and what they want. And then she starts to get them on the phone, and she discovers that the company's best customers were not athletes. They were people who work all day on their feet, like nurses. And those were the people who were buying the compression socks. So Vim and Vigor was reaching its best customers really despite itself, because it was not marketing to them at all. It was marketing to a completely different set of people. And once they knew that, they were able to adjust the product line and how they speak to their consumer. And in so doing, they unlocked all this tremendous growth. And that right there, I think, is it's a wonderful example of how you need to, one, be open to the possibility that the thing that you're doing isn't quite perfect, and that there's going to need to be major change as part of the journey. And then number two is take seriously what you learn, right? I mean, part of the problem, I guess, at Blockbuster was that they had surely done some sophisticated analysis of where the entertainment industry was going, enough that John, the CEO, wanted to start investing in digital, but the company didn't take it seriously, and they weren't willing to make that investment. Vim and Vigor, I mean, it's easier to turn a small ship around than a large ship, but Vim and Vigor was, and as a result, the company's growth exploded. And I think that we can do this as individuals too, by constantly asking ourselves questions about what are we seeing around us that's changing, and what do we need in order to grow. There are three questions that I have found to be incredibly helpful in my own journey, as I see that some kind of change needs to take place. So I'll tell you them, and they are: number one, what do I have? Number two, what do I need? And number three, what's available? Like, what do I have? What is my current status? What is within my reach? When I was a small town newspaper reporter and I wanted to start doing bigger things, and I didn't have any connections, and I didn't have any experience. What do I have? What I have is a job at a tiny newspaper, and nobody's reading my work here. What do I need? Well, I guess if I'm being realistic about it, what I need is to learn. I need to learn how to write better. I need to learn from better editors that I don't have access to, because they're not working alongside me at this paper, and I need to ultimately be able to prove to larger publications that I can work at their level. But they're not going to hire me to do that. What's available? That we have to take that question very seriously. What's available? Not like in a hypothetical sense, not in a fantasy sense. What is truly available? What can I reach my hand out and grab right now today? And in my case, the answer was large publications. The New York Times is not hiring me. Like when I'm a tiny little newspaper, community newspaper reporter, they're not going to hire me. Washington Post is not going to hire me. But I can pitch an individual article as a freelancer, And maybe they'll consider the merits of a single story of mine and take a risk on me and let me write a single story. And if I can get that, I can prove my value, and I can also gain access to a great editor who's going to work with me. So that's what I did. I quit that job and I sat in my bedroom for 9 months.
What year was this?
Oh, this was 2003.
It's so funny because that's when I did a similar approach and began my professional writing career. Basically, it started in January 2003.
Huh. Oh, that's so funny. We were starting.
And I started pitching articles everywhere. One took a chance, and then I grew from there.
That's exactly what happened with me. It's exactly what happened with me. And I was sitting there in this bedroom. I mean, the stakes were low. I was young. I was living in a dumpy apartment with a bunch of friends. My rent was $500 a month. We lived next to a graveyard. But I
That's
took
a
that
good
risk.
little side note.
I know.
Good storytelling.
So, actually, funny, crazy thing. I had mentioned on another podcast the graveyard detail, and then so it was in Holden, Massachusetts, which is another important detail for this. And then I got a DM from a guy who was like, I grew up in Holden, Massachusetts, and I learned how to drive in a graveyard. And I wonder if it was the same graveyard. So I went onto Google Maps and found where I lived and sent him the name of the graveyard, which was St. Mary Graveyard. And sure enough, that was where he learned to drive. So possibly I was sitting there looking out the window as this guy was learning how to drive. I don't know, but small world.
Funny.
And that's what did it. That's what did it. And so again, I'm just going to repeat those questions. What do I have? What do I need? What's available? If you take those questions very seriously, a path will open up in front of you.
Yeah, so let's do that exercise right now with you.
Yeah.
So what do you have right now? You're publisher of Entrepreneur Magazine. You've built out your personal brand with podcasts. You have books, consulting, speaking engagements. What do you need right now? You'd actually would like a broader platform. You want to have a great best-selling book and more people wanting you to consult or speak or whatever.
Yeah, that's correct. So I would say that I am in the middle at this very moment as we talk of exploring the power of one of the what's availables to me. So, I mean, what's my goal right now? I'll be candid. I love my role at Entrepreneur. I'm not in any rush to leave it. I'll be, just stress that. But one of the things that I'm very aware of, because I spend all my time with entrepreneurs who think about ownership of things, is that I don't own the most prominent part of myself, because I don't own Entrepreneur Magazine, but I am mostly associated as the editor-in-chief of Entrepreneur Magazine. So that is great for me in one way, because somebody else spent decades building this brand, and then I get the halo effect of it, and I get to have this prominent title, and people take me very seriously as a result. But what I don't love is that I don't have control of it, because it's not mine. I'm renting it. And I hope to rent it for a lot longer, but I also want to be mindful that now is also an opportunity to build something that I do own. And that to me is, well, let's establish me as a person, as an authority that people recognize as a standalone entity. And then I can build on top of that with additional media products and other opportunities. So I spent a long time. So what do I have? What I have is a prominent position, but that has a downside. What do I need? I need to create ownership, which is to say that I need to build myself up as a kind of standalone entity in the world. Again, I'll just stress again, and not like I'm looking to leave Entrepreneur immediately or anytime soon, but because I think these things
Entrepreneur
can exist
Magazine,
side by side. I just want to keep saying it. So, and then what's available? Well, that I spent a long time talking to a lot of people about what is available. Now, what's available a couple of years ago was social media. Social media is available. I can start to establish a voice anywhere, and then also I could build a newsletter and find other ways of building an audience and engaging them. Speaking is available, so I started to get really good at that, because it's a great way to make money if you can get on that circuit.
Again, it's like this spoken wheel approach.
Yes, that's right. And then
what are the spokes from what you have?
And then a book then helps amplify everything. And so that's why that's a big reason why I did the book. And then I am looking at what else is available, and I'm having very interesting conversations with
Jason.
people about partnerships and whatever. And I'll tell you, James, like literally an hour before we hopped on this call, I got this amazing DM from somebody on LinkedIn. It's like I've never gotten a message quite like this. So I'm just going to share it because it's like it comes at the perfect time for me because the book is launching. I'm very nervous about it. I want it to do well, and so okay. Check this out. So this comes from this woman. I had already asked her if I could share this publicly. So because I immediately responded, she said yes. So I'll say her name, which is Ariel Jordan Cassidy. She describes
name.
herself as a great name. She describes herself as a founder in digital media and ad tech. Okay, so here's what she writes me. She writes the subject line of her message to me was pre-ordered your book. Your sales funnel works. Smiley face. She writes, "Hey Jason, I just wanted to say congrats on your book launching soon. I pre-ordered it today. I also wanted to let you know that your sales funnel is really working. I've always been a fan of what you've been doing with Entrepreneur Magazine, and I started following your LinkedIn profile after someone in my network liked one of your posts a couple weeks ago. Really been enjoying your LinkedIn content, so I clicked on one of your calls to action for my newsletter because I plug the newsletter. I got the first one today and really loved it, so I used the link at the bottom to pre-order your book. Just thought you might want to know that your content and marketing efforts are really working, and I can't wait to read the book, and et cetera, et cetera." Okay, so like that, it's so funny to hear somebody articulate it like that because you often think of people going through a sales funnel as sort of not really being aware that they're in a sales funnel. She clearly, because she's in business, is very aware of her own consumer journey. And so she was able to like reflect all this to me. But that was exactly what I've been trying to do for years. Like it's that, right? Start with where I'm able to reach people, which is entrepreneur. And then, in a complementary way, also shift people over to recognizing me as a standalone entity, capturing them in whatever surface way I can on some sort of social media, moving them into some more direct connection like a newsletter, and then ultimately building enough trust that I sell a product to them like the book. It happened. It's crazy.
Yeah.
So now the question is, how do I do that over and over and over again?
The answer to that, which you've basically been describing, are identifying more and more spokes. For instance, the public speaking could lead to a broader network, which leads to either more stories, more consulting, more speaking, more guests for a podcast, more, on and on. Your podcasting probably always, could lead to, and your public speaking can lead to more income, which gives you more freedom and so on. And again, more access to stories, more access to leverage your network. And look, it's interesting. Like you mentioned, you don't own Entrepreneur Magazine. And there have been successful sites even recently, like the Hustle Co. or Trends.co, which, kind of were like Entrepreneur Magazine on steroids. Like they would so focus on like opportunities right this second today and what all the data was and so on. And they became a newsletter and sold for, I don't know what they sold for, but let's say tens of millions. Yeah. We know those guys, those guys. They're it's well earned, but there is opportunities like that right now.
Yeah. So everything that you just said there is correct. And I'll add one more, which is that I have to, and this is for me, but this is for everybody, because everybody's on some version of this journey where they're trying to recognize what they have and how to grow it. So I also have to be aware of what are the things that I'm doing that need to change, right? Like what are the things that I'm doing that I'm not doing right, or that I'm not doing enough of, or how can I refine the way that I'm doing things? Because one of the things I really want to make sure I do is have a great situational awareness of what I'm doing that's effective and what I'm missing. One of the people I spoke to in the book is this guy named Jim Quik, who's a world-renowned
I
brain
know Jim
coach.
very well.
Yeah,
he's been on this podcast.
Oh yeah, great. So yeah, I love Jim, and so Jim. One of the things that Jim talks about is what he calls what is your dominant question, and what Jim says is like, look, you should think of your brain as a filtration device, and you're going to program it to filter for thoughts and actions in a particular way, and we all ask ourselves a question over and over and over again that he calls the dominant question, and this question really is like it's like the programming for the filtering device, and you can identify and change that question, and that can be a powerful way to shift the way that you think and interact with the world. And as we were talking about this, I realized that I think my dominant question is, what am I missing? which I think was trained into me as a journalist, where every time that I am in a situation, I'm thinking, what else do I need to learn about this? What is this person not telling me? And so on. But then I just started applying it to my own life. What am I missing? So I think about that all the time for everything that I do. I make all these things, but what am I missing? Or what am I missing about what's ineffective, and how could I do it better? Now, I asked Jim what he thought about that dominant question for myself. And he said, like every dominant question, there are good and bad things about it. The good about it is that it pushes you to be extremely thorough. The bad about it is that it could drive FOMO, and a fear of missing out, and it could drive a kind of dissatisfaction, which is totally true, because I, despite having achieved many things, still kind of beat myself up about the things that I have not yet achieved, which is common. Everybody does it, but also, like my wife will be driven crazy because we'll be out with friends and she'll be tired and want to go home, and I will not want to leave because what am I missing? What else is going to happen tonight? And so I'm working on that. But anyway, I bring that up to you, one, to help anybody think about their own dominant question, which I think is really valuable, but two, to say that this is also an opportunity to build into the way that you think some expectation of change, that the thing that you're doing is not perfect, that you are a product in permanent beta, as Reid Hoffman, co-founder of LinkedIn, likes to say. Think of yourself as a product in permanent beta, and that what we're doing now works to some degree, but that we are going to have to change in some way in order to do better. We need to build that into our expectations.
So what aren't you think? What do you think you're not thinking right now? If we were to brainstorm, at least, like, we're not going to come up with an answer.
Yeah.
But what could you not be thinking of? What's a left field thing? Like, for instance, we're talking about you, and you've been referring to how to kind of even leverage your personal brand further.
Mhm.
What if you went totally left field? So you're here you are running Entrepreneur Magazine,
Yeah.
which is focused on franchises. Why don't you go in with a group and buy a bunch of McDonald's franchises and use your knowledge there to build them up and then flip them and make millions of dollars?
Right. That's a very good question. So I mean, I could do that. I would want to stay within what I feel like are my core competencies, which is not going to be flipping McDonald's. Okay, this is a really interesting question. There are a couple different ways to go with it, right? One, I will tell you some things that I'm aware of that I leave on the table. Number one is that I have not committed the money because I'm afraid. Frankly, I'm just afraid of spending it. I have not committed the money to building out the kind of team that a lot of people who I compare myself against have. Right. So, like, let's talk about Jim Quik, for example. You look at Jim Quick's social media, and it is pumping. I mean, he has so much coming out, and there's no way that Jim Quik himself is like personally posting all that. He has built a great content team around himself. I have not done that. I basically drive every single thing through myself, which is the reason why I'm up till 11:30 p.m. Most nights, like banging away on my computer. Now this is crazy, and it has to stop. And I have to figure out basically how do I try to scale myself. And part of that is going to be spending money. I've not been willing to do that. Another one is I haven't really taken video that seriously. I dabble in it, but I don't do it enough. And so those are the sort of missed opportunities. But there are other ways to think. I could quit. I mean, for all the thing that I stressed 14 million times earlier, because of my fear of the CEO of Entrepreneur Magazine listening to this, but I could quit. I could quit Entrepreneur, and I could say, you know what, it's time to hang my shingle out as a full service production company. I mean, I have a company. I have my own company. It's called Hey Pfeiffer Productions. It's a production company, but it's primarily a housing company for revenue for my book and speaking and newsletters and all that stuff. But I could just say, I've gotten everything that I could get out of this role, and former editor-in-chief of Entrepreneur Magazine is just as powerful as current editor-in-chief of Entrepreneur Magazine, and it's time to clear all this time that I spend making a magazine and just build my own thing. I could do that. I'm not ready to do that, frankly, but I guess I could. And if I did, then I'd have to push myself to get really creative and start to think of new opportunities. So, I mean, there's something that's sitting there right there. I don't know. What do you think?
It seemed to me like you expressed that ownership
Mhm.
was a need for you.
Yeah.
But your what is it for and who you are is like, I help people. I'm the one who's going to help people adapt, and
Yeah.
that's like this overriding vision. So when I threw that idea out of left field, it wasn't necessarily out of left field. It's a way for you to take ownership of something,
Mhm.
but B, when you do it yourself in that way, which is so different from how you've adapted in the past, it gives you an extra story and a different kind of audience to keep building that platform.
Yeah.
So that's why I was kind of taking a left turn instead of, finding out what's at the next exit on the highway.
No, I like it.
I'm not saying that's a good way to think. It's just I try to always think, what's something that I haven't, what's the thing that I instinctively shouldn't do? Maybe, that's the question to ask, is maybe I should do that.
Right.
But because it's so ingrained in me that I shouldn't do it, I don't even think it.
Yeah, that's well, so what it reminds me of is it's a have you ever heard as a metaphor, knock the flagpole down?
No.
Okay, so Mark Randolph, the
Sounds familiar.
Mark Randolph is a co-founder of Netflix, and he was the first CEO, and he wrote this little anecdote in a story for Entrepreneur, and I'm trying to find it right now so I can get the details right, but I can't find it fast enough. So I'll just hope I have it in my head correctly. So here's the story. After the Kent State shootings, these activists walked into a local McDonald's and they said, "You got to lower the flagpole to half mast." And so, they were angry, and so the McDonald's manager lowered the flagpole. Somebody else saw this and was very angry and went to the McDonald's and said, "Damn it, that is disrespectful. You got to raise that flag back up." And so the manager raised the flag back up. And then the activists saw that the flag was back up and they came in and they said, "If you do not lower that flag, we are going to burn this place to the ground." And so, at this point, the manager just does not know what to do. And so he calls the president of McDonald's and he says, "What do I do?" And the president of McDonald's said, "Well, I see you've got a delivery truck showing up in 30 minutes. So when the truck's there, just ask them to back into the flagpole and knock it down." Right? This basically being like, what's the other solution here? Right? Because what we often do is we get trapped in some kind of way in which we think that the only options that are on the table are the options that we can imagine on the table, but there's always something that can knock the flagpole down, that can just demolish those options and come up with some completely different solution for it. And I feel like that's kind of what your instinct here is. That's what you're searching for, is like, what's the knock the flagpole down answer? Because a lot of what's in front of me, and a lot of what I'm sure people who are listening to this and thinking about the decisions in front of them are thinking is, well, what options do I take that I basically have already thought of? And it's possible that what you really need is a knock the flagpole down moment where you say, no, there's actually I can create additional solutions here. It just requires thinking outside of the options I already have.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. It's not only thinking outside the options you already have, but thinking very specifically about the options you think are impossible.
Mm-hmm.
And like, for instance, if you just make a list, what things are impossible, and you don't be ridiculous about it. Like, you're not going to put on the list time travel or whatever. Like, the things you put on this list are the things closest to you that you think are impossible.
Mm-hmm.
Again, you're not going to say, I'm going to be a plumber, but you might say, I'm not going to own a franchise. You're going to say, I'm not going to, I don't know, what else would be on that list? The things that you think are not possible. You're not going to
Impossible
be
for me. Yeah,
you're not going to start your own magazine,
right.
your own print
No,
magazine.
I'm not going to do that.
You're not going to be a reporter at a local newspaper. And so, but that's actually that's almost too ridiculous, because that's well, maybe not. Maybe it's not ridiculous.
Sure. I mean, I could, look, there have been plenty of people who have had prominent roles in national media who have then said, it's time for a quieter life. I'm going to move to a small town and run the local newspaper and be happy and be less stressed. So it's a thing people have done. I'm not going to do it, but yeah, it's an option.
I almost don't want to make an analogy to chess, because I talk about that a lot in this podcast, but it's a real challenge for creativity in chess. When you're playing a game, your opponent and you might assume there's a move you can't make. So you're both playing under that assumption. Oh, he can't take this because it's protected.
Right.
But that's often the moves that you have to start looking at first, because that's where you're going to find an opportunity that your opponent hasn't seen, is looking at what the moves that seem impossible.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same. I think it's the same thing for life. Is that I remember one time I had an investment where I thought there was only one way out of this investment,
Mm-hmm.
and for years I was trying to pursue this avenue. It was basically do a kind of merger with this investment, and instead, I finally thought I would do the thing I never considered, was just to simply sell the investment and use the money for something else. So, because the investment wasn't working for
Yeah.
me, and that's what happened, and it was great. It essentially saved my life at a time when I was going broke. So, that would be like an example for me.
Yeah. Well, so this dovetails nicely into something that I've thought a lot about and have written about, which is actually in the book, which is this idea of reconsidering the impossible. I got really curious about why I was seeing so many during the earliest months of the pandemic. I was seeing many entrepreneurs redefine their businesses in ways that were tangibly valuable, right? Like they were seeing opportunity even in the earliest phases of this disruption, and they were reaching this wouldn't go back moment, as I've come to call it. And I was wondering what's happening here, and called a lot of people. And the answer that I loved the most came from this guy, Brian Berkey, who is I think, business studies and legal ethics professor at Wharton. And Brian said that moments of disruption force us to shift the window on what we are willing to collectively take seriously, which is a nice academic way of saying that we reconsider the impossible, that there's a band of options and a sort of almost infinite band of options, but we don't see that because it's very hard to see that, right? Like we have to filter something, right? You can't, we don't have the time and capacity to literally consider every option. So what we do is we build a little window that we look through, and we see a small set of the available options. And we say, these are the options that are possible. These are the options that are good, that are valuable, that make sense for me. And those are the ones that we stick with. And then a moment of disruption, it often makes the options that we have in that window no longer work. And when they don't work anymore, we have to shift. We have to look outside of it. And that's when we discover that some of the things that we had discarded, that we said were impossible, were in fact the greatest possible option for us. The thing that is hardest, but is also our greatest opportunity, is to do that even when we're not forced to. Because
that's a really good point.
Because like the pandemic will force you to do it.
But that's when you have to almost simulate panic in yourself to go along with your 4-step model here, which I think is possible.
Yeah. And a good way to simulate the panic is to imagine and in a realistic way what will play out if you only stick to the options that you have. Right? I remember talking to this guy Andy Monfried, he has this ad tech company called Loadamate. Do you know him?
Let me just say, 6 years old, Camp Lakeview. Andy Monfried and I were best friends there.
No.
Yeah, and he was the best athlete in the camp. I was the worst athlete in the camp. And as he reminded me, 40 years later or 30 years later, it was a Jewish camp, so that's not saying much.
That's true.
But he's a you've met him, right? He's a tall, big guy. He was a skinny little kid, of course, but he was a great athlete and probably still is. But we're good friends.
Oh, that's so funny. Well, I cannot speak to his athletic prowess, but as a skinny Jewish kid myself, I can confirm that I would not have been much competition. So okay, well that's great. So maybe this story, but Andy started this company called
I know
Loadamate.
very well. They even at one point asked me to go on the board of Loadamate.
Oh, that's so funny.
It didn't work out for various reasons, but I actually owe him a call. I feel really, but this is one of those situations. Sorry to interrupt your story, but
no.
It's one of those situations where I really feel really bad. I owe him a call. I've been, so anyway.
Yeah.
I have to,
well, that's great.
It's one of those signs I have to explain why I didn't call earlier, and then I feel bad, and then I put it off more.
Yeah. Well,
But anyway, go
now
ahead.
you have an excuse, which is that it came up in
Yes.
conversation. So, so Andy, so Lodomy, you could probably explain Lodomy better than me, but it's basically it started as an ad tech company. Ad tech is an incredibly complicated world, and for the purposes of this conversation, you don't really need to understand it. So, so anyway, Andy built this company up, and it had grown to about $30 million in revenue, and they were doing this kind of ad targeting online, and they were at the very early days of that. And then he went into a meeting one day, and the client said, "So hey, we're gonna not pay you anymore because we're building this ad targeting technology ourselves." And Andy left that meeting thinking, "Well, that sucks." And then he heard it a second time from somebody else, and then he thought, "I got to tear this whole thing down." And he said that was incredibly challenging because he had investors who were like, "You're still making money." And you're going to be making money for a long time to come. And he had a team that he had hired to do this thing, and they were doing it exceptionally well. But Andy was, I mean, to the point you were making about kind of simulating that panic in yourself. I mean, Andy was playing it out, and he was saying, "Look, I could run this company for maybe another 5, even 10 years and have it be successful and profitable. But the thing is that what we are doing is going to be replicated elsewhere, and we are going to lose the positioning that we have right now. And it's not a company that's going to grow forever. It's a company that's going to shrink and then eventually die. And that's just the fact of it." So he decided to basically kill that entire business. He laid off like half his staff, and this $30 million business completely disappeared. And then he rebuilt from scratch, and he ultimately rebuilt it into a successful company that it is today. But he said that it was an incredibly hard decision because he was changing before he was forced to. And he had people who were surrounding him who were saying, "What are you doing? This is crazy. You're killing a very healthy company right now." And his answer had to be, "I know, but I just trust that this will not be a healthy company in 5 to 10 years. And if I wait for 5 to 10 years, then I'm going to have no options. But right now I have options. Right now I can act with I can act in control rather than acting in panic. And now is the time to do it. The time to do it is the time that maybe seems the craziest and feels the hardest, but it's now." And he succeeded as a result.
Yeah, no, he has it's a very impressive story. And when I saw his name in your book, actually, I was like, "Ah, it's a really small world." Because I've even speaking at one of their, I guess, holiday events or customer events, something like that.
Yeah,
So it's funny,
that's
and
so
yeah,
funny.
he's very smart businessman and a very valuable story. And look, your book, Jason, is filled with valuable stories. Build for tomorrow, an action plan for embracing change, adapting fast, and future-proofing your career. I feel a little bit like the publisher came up with the title because it has that kind of like business self-help thing. But this is more than a business self-help book. Like this is like you could read this entire book and not think once about business. You could think about your whole life, your career, your relationships, your businesses, your investments, and the stories in there are great. And I again love how you tell your own story, but you have stories about so many different companies, so many different people. It's a page-turning book. It's great, and I'm glad we had a chance to talk about it. And look, we could even talk more about it. Come on the podcast again soon,
Deal.
and let's have some more fun.
Well, thanks, James. It's always great chatting with you. I really appreciate it. And it was fun digging. I mean, I loved the questions that you asked to sort of dig into me. We've known each other long enough that I felt good and comfortable doing that. And I wouldn't do that with everyone. So I really appreciate that. By the way, I pitched the book with the title, "You Come from the Future." And they were not.
I love that title
that.
much better.
That's what it was. You can tell my publisher. But no, I really appreciate it. This was so fun. And thanks so much.
At Discount Tire, we know how valuable your time is around the holidays. Get 30% shorter average wait time when you buy and book online at discounttire.com, so you can spend more time with friends and family this holiday season. Discount Tire, let's get you taken care of.
Luxury is meant to be livable. Discover the new leather collection at Ashley with premium quality leather sofas, recliners, and more, all built to last. No matter how many spills, scuffs, or pet-related mishaps come its way, the leather collection at Ashley is made with the durability you need for the whole family. Shop the new leather collection at Ashley and find chairs starting at $499.99 and sofas at $599.99. Ashley, for the love of home.